Hey Playas, how you doing? Welcome back to Playas Guide. This episode of Playas Guide, I'm going to be talking about some more modern games released on modern consoles that have a retro aesthetic and feel to them. So these games are new, but they're made to appeal to retro gamers like you and me. If you're interested in retro gaming and retro gaming is something that you enjoy doing, you're probably going to like a lot of the games here that I'm going to talk about in this episode of Playas Guide. I'm also going to do a follow-up episode next week, so be sure that you're subscribed to the channel and ready for that upload where I talk about more games similar to the games that I talk about in this episode of Playas Guide. So first up is a game called Oniken. This game reminds me a lot of Shatterhand, which I talked about last week in the Retro Futurism episode for NES games. And it also reminds me a lot of Strider, the way the character in this game runs around with his sword and hacking and slashing his enemies. The protagonist in this game is also equipped with grenades, which come in very handy for attacking enemies that are using ranged weapons, especially if they're located up on a platform. This game also offers a variety of different platforming. There's a stage where you're running from a polar bear that you have to throw grenades at. There's also a stage, I think it's the second stage, where you're on like a jet ski and you're jumping off of some different platforms and attacking and dodging different enemies. This game has great retro aesthetic. It reminds me of an NES game. It plays like an NES game. It looks great and it's got a lot going on for it. And it also has some of that post-apocalyptic retro futurism that you might, have enjoyed from the previous episode. So you're definitely going to like this game, I think. It's quite affordable. It goes on sale on Steam and PlayStation 4 often enough that you could pick it up for just a couple bucks. Gunlord X. This game reminds me of Metroid, and I'm sure watching the footage here, you probably would agree. It definitely looks like a Super Nintendo, Sega Genesis, a 16-bit era game. And it feels like one. It plays a lot like Metroid, but it's not quite as good as Metroid. Now, don't let that discourage you from playing this game. It does have a lot going for it. There's a lot of collectibles and different things. Easily worth the money. I mean, this is another game that's a couple bucks, especially if you get it on sale. Enemies look great in this game. They got a lot of detail and some interesting attacks. You have a gun that you can power up to, I think it's 5 different power-ups, and some you're going to find you like more than others. What's really interesting about this game, too, is it also has shooter stages where you're in your fighter spaceship shooting down other alien spaceships. It's a good game. It just sometimes it gets a little bit too busy on screen, I find, but that's my only complaint, and I would say that I'm kind of nitpicking there a bit with that. I think you'll enjoy the graphics, the music, and the overall gameplay of this one. Owlboy. This is one that you've probably heard of, maybe even played. It did get a physical release. This one sells for a little bit more. You can get it on sale, but it'll be more than a couple bucks. It might be $10 to $20, I'm gonna say. Like I said, depending on the platform you purchase it on and whether there's a sale or not. This game was very enjoyable for me. You play as Owlboy, who is a mute owl boy. Is misunderstood and sort of underappreciated in his village. and then is somehow tasked with the responsibility of now saving this owl world that they live in, where they're taking on these mechanical pirate characters. The cool thing about this game is that you pick up different allies along the way, and then these friends that you've made that become your allies will help you progress through the stages and unlock different areas of the game. So the game gets a little bit more complex, but it does it in a gradual way that it's not overwhelming at all, and it is quite a bit of fun. There's a lot of variety to the stages and everything that's going on here. It's not just platforming because you're an owl and you have the ability to fly, and with the help of the partners and acquaintances that you make along the way, you have a variety of different attacks that can be more beneficial than others in different scenarios and against different enemies throughout the game. Owlboy's one that it's not a really long game, but I think you're going to find that most of these games aren't. This one's a little more in depth. It'll remind you of maybe a 16 or a 32-bit game. For me, it kind of reminds me of Super Nintendo a bit more, but I also play a lot of Super Nintendo and have played a lot of Super Nintendo, so that could be why. Double Dragon 4. So you might have thought that Super Double Dragon on the Super Nintendo was Double Dragon 4 because there was a Double Dragon 5. Well, if you thought that, you were wrong. Double Dragon 4 was released on all major consoles in 2017, be it PC, Switch, PS4, or your Xbox One. You were able to play this game, and you were able to play two-player. The game is very reminiscent of the original 3 games on the NES. The graphics are very similar. Some of the sprites of various characters like Linda and Abobo were taken right out of the NES games. This game is much more colorful though, because it doesn't have the limits of the color palette that the NES had. So you're going to see more vibrant color and it's going to look a lot nicer. The game is also quite a bit longer than any of the NES games. It has a total of 12 missions, which get progressively more difficult, so you will find the game to be a challenge, but you can play with a friend. You can play two-player on this one. Another game that is quite inexpensive and also frequently goes on sale and is on all of those consoles. Pick this one up if you're a fan of the original Double Dragon games. You won't be disappointed. The Messenger. This is one that you have definitely heard of, I would hope. But if you haven't, that's why I wanted to include it in here. This is an amazing game, up there with the likes, I would say, of something like Shovel Knight. The Messenger is a ninja game where you are traveling through time to capture a scroll. You're accompanied by a familiar that will take gold coins from you in exchange for lives, so that you can never really die in this game as long as you're progressively playing and collecting coins, which you'll get a lot of. And you'll also get some different power-ups throughout this game, and be able to use them, such as like grappling, which come in very handy. You'll be jumping from platform to platform and hacking or slashing your way through a ton of enemies throughout the levels, which are all integrated on a large map that you can go through from one section to the other, unless you've activated different teleportation sections where you can go from a main hub, which is close by your shop, and you can, obviously purchase upgrades and stuff there to your weapons, and there's boss fights. The boss fights are great. And then throughout the game, you start playing and you're in this 8-bit mode, and then you go into like a 16-bit mode, and you're going to start using this throughout the game in different areas to access different sections, because as you change from 8-bit to 16-bit, you'll know that your environment has been altered. And when you see that your environment has been altered, you're able to access different areas or do different things by switching throughout. There's also some boss fights where you'll need to use this ability as well. And you know what? This is just overall a great game. I'm not going to say too much more about it. If you haven't played it, go check it out. But if you're familiar with a lot of these retro modern games, then this is one that I hope that you've played because it's a blast. There's also a summer DLC that came out back in 2019, I believe. And that was a free add-on. So if you missed that, go back and play through that. It's a fun little mini story that, you know, if you enjoyed the game, then you would definitely enjoy. So this next game is called 1980X. Maybe you've heard of it or played it. Maybe you haven't. It's not so well known, but it's definitely not hidden. I don't think it got quite the exposure that it deserved, but it is a short game. Now, the game has an amazing atmosphere and soundtrack, especially if you're into stuff like new retro wave. So I love the aesthetics and the music and everything about this game. And it had this sort of feeling that you were in like maybe a John Hughes movie or something with the narrative. Anyways, you're a teen who likes to go to the arcade and plays some different games. And in this game, you get to play those different games. There is one called Beating Heart that you start off playing, and it's a beat 'em up. There's one called Shadow Play, which is a ninja game. It's like a running hack and slash game. There's Out of the Void, which was a shooter game. It was, and the graphics for these games look really good. I mean, it is obvious that they're not actual retro games, but they have that aesthetic that look really cool. There's one called Kill Screen, which is a dungeon crawler, and was actually quite enjoyable. I'm not really into dungeon crawlers. This was a good one, but once you figure out the attacks for the enemies, you can just run right through it, and it is pretty easy. But these are all short games. And then there is The Runaway, which is a high-speed racing game. It's going to remind you of Outrun or Road Blasters or Rad Racer, something along those lines. And it's great. It's just, this game is very atmospheric. The art style and the music is amazing. Very affordable. I bought this one as soon as it came out, so I haven't really been watching it to see if it's gone on sale too much here or there. But you can get it on PC, you can get it on PS4. I'm assuming it's also on Xbox and Switch. Now, I don't know about all the modern consoles that have just come out, like the Xbox Series X and the PS5 for these games. But I'm sure you can find some of them on those consoles if you've given up on the last gen altogether. Guys, next week I'm doing another episode, a follow-up to this one with more games like this. But until then, if you are looking for more Player's Guide, there are now streamers every single day of the week on Player's Guide on Twitch. So if you can't get enough retro gaming content, come check Player's Guide out on Twitch. We got you covered daily. There's also Player's Guide podcast, and follow Player's Guide on Instagram and Twitter for all the latest updates, because Player's Guide wants to be your source for retro gaming and video game collecting. So until next week, later, players.